Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. Today, we're talking about some really great reissues that have come out over the last few weeks and comparing them to older pressings that I've got. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button down below, and make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. So the question of reissues versus original pressings is an argument that's gone on forever. And honestly, it's really subjective because everyone hears everything differently. I have some reissues that I think sound better than older pressings, and I've got some reissues that I think sound like garbage compared to older pressings or original pressings. So don't take this as me saying that all reissues sound good, because that's not always the case. Some reissues sound terrible. Some reissues, like I said, there are improvements that can be made, especially when the original recording process wasn't the greatest. Jethro Tull's Aqualung, I think, is another great example. When Steven Wilson remixed that album, in a lot of ways, it sounds better than the original releases do. So when comparing original pressings versus reissues, everything's always subjective. People are always going to hear different things. People are going to have different opinions. I will say that there are some examples of some reissues that sound really good. Take the recent, I shouldn't say recent, they were done in 2016, but the 2016 remastered editions of all the Pink Floyd albums, those are all remastered by James Guthrie. They sound great. I've got original pressings of most of Pink Floyd's albums. A lot of those sound better than the original pressings, or at least sound about the same as the original pressings. Of course, there are some albums that's not really the case with. Take The Dark Side of the Moon and The Wall. Those are two big albums that I can hear a bigger difference between their older pressings that I've got and the new reissues. But overall, I think those 2016 reissues in most instances sound better than older releases. But I wanted to focus on two recent ones. So the first one I've got, this is the new recent reissue of Tracy Chapman's self-titled debut album. I do have an original pressing here also. I got the original pressing probably about a year or so back. Paid a good price for it. I want to say it was like $35. I will say that the reissue that I've got is on orange vinyl, but orange versus black versus red, they're all going to sound the same. But like color-wise, looking at the cover, because cover is something that I've noticed with a lot of reissues, especially with 80s and 90s albums. The reissues tend to have almost kind of a blurry look to the album artwork. That's not the case with this one, other than the color being a little different. So the original pressing here has kind of a darker tint to it, and then the reissue is a little lighter. But other than that, the artwork on the reissue looks fantastic. I think if you're sitting side by side, most people aren't going to be able to tell which one is the reissue and which one is the original pressing. But as far as the sound goes for this release, I do tend to think that the reissue sounds a tad better than the original pressing. The original pressing sounds good. There's nothing wrong with it. But the reissue has a little bit more warmth to the album. I think the most disappointing thing about this reissue is the fact that Tracy Chapman, I guess, had to personally write the label to try to get them to reissue this album, which makes no sense to me, especially with how high the demand was for this album, that there wasn't an interest from the label to do it on their own. It took her pushing the label to get this thing reissued. I'm glad she did. Like I said, it sounds really good. Am I going to sell my original pressing because of this new release? Probably not. I think I'll hold on to both of them for now. But I think for most people out there, they're going to be perfectly satisfied with this reissue because it does sound good, especially comparing this reissue to the one that came out last year, the one that was pressed in Argentina. There's a huge difference between the two releases. I know a lot of people out there that have complained about the horrible sound quality on that one from last year. I think this new reissue is definitely the way to go with it. And with this album in particular, I think this is probably one of the better sounding reissues that I've heard over the last several years. Another recent reissue that I can do an A-B comparison with is Siamese Dream by Smashing Pumpkins. So this is the new reissue with the original artwork from 1993. This is the first time it's been reissued with this artwork in a very long time. And that was the big thing that made me want to grab this album. And the pressing I have to compare it with is the 2011 remaster. This one overall sounds better. The 2011 pressing has a better dynamic range. Overall, it just sounds better. The reissue doesn't sound bad. And I think if you put these on, if you just listen to the reissue, I don't think you're going to have a problem with it. It does sound good, especially for the price that a lot of these go for. These tend to run you a little bit more. And I think because of the difference between the two releases, these are actually going to go up in value more. I have read some reviews where people said the sound is a little distorted on this one. I haven't noticed that. I don't know. I guess that's the big thing with a lot of these reviews, are you never really know the equipment people are using to listen to these albums on. Now, granted, I'm sure they're not listening to them on Crosley's or anything like that. I'm sure they're decent quality turntables, but there's so many different variables that go into each and every turntable that it's really kind of hard to make that assessment. But I didn't notice any distortion on this album at all. And if I didn't have that 2011 pressing to compare it to, I would probably say the same thing, that this is a really great sounding album, even though, like I said, it is a good sounding album. It's just not as great as that 2011. I think I was most disappointed because I waited so long for this album to get reissued with this artwork. Just the 2011, and this is everything, ever since 2011, this album has been reissued with this artwork. I'm sure there's some kind of story or some reasoning that they had to go with this coloration on this on the artwork. But, you know, this one looks better. And when comparing the two, this reissue sounds a little muddy, sounds a little compressed. It doesn't have that crispness that 2011 pressing does. But like I said, if you don't have an older pressing of this album, I don't think you're going to notice it all that much. But I really don't want to push anyone away from picking up a copy of this reissue because it does sound okay. You know, it just, if you don't have this 2011 pressing or an older pressing to compare it to, you're not going to really notice the big differences between the two. And honestly, I was hoping this new pressing would sound better just because I want to sell the older pressing. I'm trying to get away from having multiple copies of albums. But I'm probably going to hold on to this one just because, like I said, I think the 2011 sounds a little bit better. But it does kind of bother me when bands drastically change their artwork on their albums. You know, there's always a nostalgia factor when it comes to listening to records, and you want the artwork for the album that you grew up listening to. So as far as quality goes between these two reissues, I think the quality on the Tracy Chapman album is better overall. If you know, to pick a winner between the two, I think it's definitely the winner for me. Like I said, even though that Siamese Dream, it doesn't sound bad. I don't want it to come off like I'm complaining about the sound quality, because if you don't have something to compare it to, you're just not going to notice it. I did want to add that I did pick up the music on vinyl version of Dirty, Rotten, Filthy, Stinking Rich by Warrant, and I thought this reissue, I do have an original pressing of it, or I did have an original pressing of it. Now, granted, my original pressing was not in the best shape, but I thought sound-wise, the reissue sounded so much better than the original pressing that I had, that I ended up selling my older pressing of it. And this is not the first album I've had that happen with. I bought a reissue of Good Charlotte's debut album when I got reissued a year or two back. And I did have a first press of that one also. And I thought that reissue sounded so much better than that first press that I sold that one also. Well, that's all I got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think of these albums. Have you picked up these reissues of that Tracy Chapman and that Smashing Pumpkins album? You know, what'd you think of the sound quality of them? Do you have older pressings to compare them to? Love to know what you guys think. Like I said, between the two, I think the Tracy Chapman album was the winner of the two reissues. But let me know what you guys think. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.